Trump is unfit to be president. And his first 4 years were bad. A second 4 will be worse. Trump casts himself as the underdog champion, saying, for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. Trump really cares only about retribution for himself, and it will consume much of a second term. He is fundamentally self-regarding. I mistakenly believed the burdens of office would discipline the president, but I found the former president consumed by self-interest. He cares almost exclusively about his own interest. Trump wanted to be surrounded by a White House of serfs to execute his orders unquestioningly. I believe foreign leaders think he is a laughing fool. Trump sent an isolationist virus coursing through the Republican Party, and in no arena has the Trump aberration been more destructive than in national security. Trump could withdraw from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a prospect likely to please Russian President Vladimir Putin. It is almost inevitable that a second-term Trump policy on Ukraine will favor Moscow. Taiwan and others along China's periphery face real peril in a second Trump term. It's a close contest between Putin and Xi Jinping, who would be happiest to see Trump back in office. So I'm somewhat perplexed myself that the Biden White House has apparently agreed that he'll get security briefings. I don't think it makes any sense, and I think it really puts whatever he's told at risk of being disclosed. The Biden administration has said that the reason they're doing this is because they want to maintain a semblance of normalcy in the campaign. So President Trump former President Trump, can't paint himself as the victim of politicization. Well, good luck with that. I mean, let's go back to the original purpose, really. President Truman had in mind when he was first authorized. I'm pretty sure it was Truman who first authorized giving these briefings to a presidential candidate. It was to avoid a candidate saying in ignorance something that could impair the national security of the United States. So it wasn't to satisfy the curiosity of the candidate. It was to protect the overall national interest. We had a hard time getting Trump to pay attention in many, many days of those briefings. And when he did really pay attention, it was often because he wanted to keep a document or something from time to time. He went on and leaked. Either give the briefing the way it should be, or let's just dispense with it and let Trump say whatever he wants. So there are voters out there who look at Donald Trump's time as president and say nothing really bad happened, or they look at what he tweeted out, or what he was discussing with the Japanese, or what he told the Russians in the Oval Office, or classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, and they'll say nothing bad happened. I have no reason whatever to doubt what John Kelly said. I think he was saying exactly what he heard from Trump. Some of those things he told me, some occurred before I arrived at the White House. The question of the Veterans Day, the Armistice Day celebration in France, I did not hear those comments there. I don't have any doubt that what John Kelly said was true. None whatever. Well, I can tell you what John Kelly once told me about the visit to Walter Reed that occurred before I arrived, when most people, when they see service members who have been grievously wounded or affected by it or stunned by the devotion to duty, patriotism, the dedication of those who have sacrificed so much and endured such brutal wounds. Trump, he said, tried to sway away from it. And John Kelly interpreted it, I think correctly, as cowardice on Trump's part. The fear that something like that could have happened to him, and he just didn't want to face it. I'm not a shrink, I don't make shrink diagnoses, but I think the cowardice analysis is correct. Well, it appalls me that he could be elected president again. I don't have any sympathy for his potential opponents on the Democratic side. I didn't vote for Biden or Trump in 2020. I'd like to see a conservative Republican on the ticket. Donald Trump is not a conservative Republican. And I think that, as I've said repeatedly on any number of occasions, he did damage his first term that has largely been repaired. But if he were elected to a second term, this time he might cause damage that would be irreparable. This is a very dangerous period we're about to enter into. Well, look, it's entirely possible. Trump uses the word treason quite a bit. He called me a traitor. Others in his administration, Mike Pompeo, called me a traitor for writing a book. That's the way they do things. And it's entirely possible that's what Trump wants to see, someone to act on it. I think the central point of what John Kelly said in that particular quotation goes to really the essence of Donald Trump. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump. Everything else is instrumental. The idea that he has a philosophy, that we have really much of an idea of all of what he'll do in a second term, freed from any electoral guardrails. Remember, he can't run for a third term, so the political constraints that he faced in his first term will be largely non-existent, simply enhance the danger of what may happen in a second term. There are a lot of other Republicans who can actually be reasonable presidents of the United States. The party has to find a way to find that person and nominate him or her. You can't leave him alone for a minute. He saw conspiracies behind rocks and was stunningly uninformed. He couldn't tell the difference between his personal interest and the country's interest. I don't think he's fit for office. I don't think he has the competence to carry out the job. There really isn't any guiding principle that I was able to discern other than what's good for Donald Trump's reelection. I've talked to people all over the world, and I think from the point of view of our friends, they're pretty disturbed by the prospect Trump might come back, the threat he poses to NATO and to other alliances. Not everybody believes that this was an unfair prosecution. Not everybody believes Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are driving it. There'll be issues on appeal. He might get it overturned on appeal, but I don't think he cares about that. He's worried about the conviction before the election. You're a lifelong Republican, and you've often touted the merits of the U.S. justice system when you're on the world stage and how our courts work and that any American can be held accountable no matter your status or your rank or your office that you've previously held. I think the jury did its job. I really do. And if you don't like the jury because it's in Manhattan and it's a certain demographic, ask Donald Trump why he did his entire business career in Manhattan. Trump only cares about Trump. He doesn't care if the institutions rise or fall. He just wants to know what Donald Trump's fate is going to be. And I think for Republicans to play into his hands is a huge mistake. You've already got other people who are out there questioning the system from the other side. And if I were in Moscow or Beijing, I would say anything that undercuts Americans' general faith in their Constitution, their institutions, weakens America. It doesn't matter whether it's from the left or the right. It's an attack on the integrity of the system itself. In the case of Donald Trump, and this prosecution is just not evident. If he can't show that Alvin Bragg has violated the law or violated the ethics rules that are applicable, then he's got to run his own chances. And to my mind, there's a kind of rough justice here, because it's deeply ironic that a person who spent a good part of his 4 years in the White House trying to weaponize the Justice Department against his political enemies is now saying he's the victim of persecution. It's sort of what comes around goes around, Mr. Trump. The Trump administration weaponizing the Justice Department? I can attest to it personally. I don't need to look at other stories. They did it to me. Trump is basically extorting the Republican Party. He's threatening that if he doesn't get the nomination, he'll blow up the presidential campaign and whoever the Democrats nominate will win. But I think what Republicans need to do to save the party and, frankly, to save the country is they can be as concerned about poor Donald Trump being mistreated by this prosecutor as they want. But the reward, the cure for that mistreatment, is not to make Donald Trump the Republican presidential nominee. Those are two completely different subjects. If he's convicted, however, at some point before the campaign ends, I think that will have a very different impact on people. You can say it's a sleazy case and it involves sleazy people, but if he's convicted of a crime, I think most Americans actually don't want a convicted felon to be their president. Will I support him? Absolutely not. I didn't support him in 2020. I wanted to vote for a real conservative. Neither the Republican or the Democratic nominee were real conservative. So I wrote in a name, and I would do the same. We have higher principles than simply defending whatever Donald Trump does. We can get over one term. 2 terms I'm more troubled about. I think Trump needs to be denied a second term. I think the damage that he's done to the United States, both internationally and domestically, can be repaired. I'm actually optimistic it can be repaired fairly quickly. But I worry that 2 terms of Trump could make a lot of that damage irreparable. And I'm going to be unhappy on election night, or whenever the election is resolved, one way or the other. I wish we had a real conservative running. We don't. So I'm going to write in the name of a conservative Republican. One of the worst things about the Trump presidency is that the philosophical basis of the party has been distorted. He said his supporters should head to the polls and watch very carefully. What did you interpret that to mean? Did his position on that unnerve you? Well, nothing he does unnerves me because I understand that everything is through the prism of what benefits him personally. And I think he was trying to sow discord in the body politic. And I think he was looking for excuses. And I think this will be an early test for Republican leaders, office holders, and others. After the election, he tries to manipulate public opinion into believing that he prevailed when he did not. On knowing in advance that Trump was erratic and untrustworthy, well, I don't think anybody's ever called me naive. I heard all of those things, to be sure. But I did believe that Trump would be affected by the gravity of the position of the presidency of the United States, and that he would recognize the weight of the decisions he had to make would affect him in a way that would make more responsible decision-making possible. And I thought I could help out. I don't regret it, even if it turned out that I was wrong. Donald Trump was not at all affected by the presidency. I was worried about him endangering American security. That's why I tried to move his policies in better directions, and why, ultimately, when I concluded that I couldn't do that, I resigned. Through my West Wing tenure, Trump wanted to do what he wanted to do based on what he knew and what he saw as his own best personal interests. And in Ukraine, he seemed finally able to have it all. The president seemed to be practicing obstruction of justice as a way of life. He broke the law. Very simple. I mean, as much as it's going to be broken, this is highly classified. That's the highest. It's highly classified information. And he did not have approval. That's come out now very loud and very strong. Putin must have been laughing uproariously afterwards. You know, we talked about President Xi. He also said that he told President Xi and China to go ahead with concentration camps for the largely minority Uyghur dissidents. And he writes that many Trump cabinet officials who were seen as loyalists, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, actually made fun of him behind his back about his lack of knowledge about foreign policy. Trump asked if Finland was part of Russia, just as an example. In the midst of talks about trade, Trump turned the conversation to the coming U.S. presidential election, alluding to China's economic capability to affect the ongoing campaigns, pleading with Xi to ensure he'd win.